Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. I'm Biola Labi.
Welcome back. I'm Tundra Biola.
Results of the governorship and state assembly elections are expected to be known from this morning going forward. But what continues to dominate the headlines is the in many parts of the country, especially the South-South region of the country. More lives have been lost, including that of a member of the House of Representatives in Ibadan, Oyo State. We will engage our guest this morning with these issues and more. He's a public affairs analyst and convener, Country First Movement. Professor Chris Mustafa Nwokobia, you are welcome to the program. Thank you for being with us this morning.
It's my pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start by asking you if you voted yesterday and what was your experience at your polling unit if you did vote yesterday.
Precisely, I was with the observers across the Federal Capital Territory, and well, like everybody has said, what we noticed everywhere across the country was voter apathy, a low turnout of voters, and you can understand exactly what may have caused that. It is left for the INEC and several other agencies of state to address and grapple with those realities.
What was your experience at the polling units where you were observing?
Well, voters did not come out. It was scanty. Everybody, painfully, because I say this with a heavy heart, did not show the enthusiasm that even the low turnout on the February 23rd election showed. It was worse than that. As it were, our democracy is on trial, if you like. As it were, there are questions to be asked and situations to grapple with. As it were, the fact was that, you know, that what happened here, there was no gubernatorial election in Abuja. What you had were area council elections. But across the country, we were following up developments, and it's democracy on trial. That's exactly what I'll call it, democracy on trial.
What did you think about the process of balloting? Was there any difference or improvement from the process on February 23rd, the Presidential and National Assembly elections? And I'd also like you to expand on what you mean by democracy being on trial.
The first thing you note is that we're supposed to notice a sizable improvement, but across board, the INEC officials did not show up on time. And then we're aware of certain places where the youth corpers, who were ad hoc staffs, had to protest. Some places in Lagos, here in Abuja, some of them said they hadn't been paid and they wanted to be paid. Then we noticed issues about, like I said, low turnout of voters, and then late arrival of voting materials, which otherwise should be an improvement on what happened the previous, the presidential and National Assembly elections. But we did not see so much of the improvement that we expected. And unfortunately, the issue of violence resurfaced, even with the massive deployment of military men and women of the armed forces. It did not stem the violence as we saw 2 weeks ago, in which the same violence was, even a lawmaker was killed somewhere in Oyo State. And the reason I use the word democracy on trial is the fact that since 1999, what we were supposed to have done as a nation was to improve on the democratic process, improve on the electoral protocol, improve on the details of democratic engagement. But tragically, what we have done is move several steps on the reverse. If we were running at 120 kilometers per hour, we're precisely doing about 60 kilometers per hour, because we have never had this level of voter apathy since 1999. We have never seen our young boys and young girls elect to stay at home rather than to go out to vote, the way we saw it yesterday. And whatever is responsible those who pretend over our democratic space must grapple with these realities. We must address it frontally. It is beyond partisanship. I have told my friends who are on the other side to put our children and indeed our country forward and elevate our discourse beyond partisanship. Elevate our discourse beyond partisan obscurantism. Elevate our discourse beyond whether you're supporting the APC or the PDP. This is about our country, and our democracy is not evoking the kind of excitement it should evoke. After almost 20 years of democratic experience, Nigerians should be excited about exercising their adult franchise. Nigerians should be excited about coming to exercise their franchise. But tragically, you could see people proudly telling you that they had no reason for which to vote. And it is simply, and I say without equivocation, a referendum on what happened 2 weeks ago. It is simply Nigerians saying that they do not believe that their votes will count. It is simply Nigerians saying that they do not see sufficient reasons for which to vote. It is simply Nigerians saying that they doubt the commitment of this independent National Electoral Commission to conduct free and fair polls. It is simply Nigerians saying that they do not trust this government to allow their votes to count. And that's the simple thing Nigerians said in very few words yesterday when proudly, rather than ashamedly, Nigerians will tell you, some people I called, did you go out to vote? Would proudly say, for what? Why should I go out to vote? And that is a major minus on our democratic practice. That is a major minus on our democratic voyage. That is a major minus on how the party in power and indeed INEC has conducted electoral processes since 2015.
Thank you. So passionate there. You have made it very clear how you feel INEC has performed. If I were to ask you to talk, let's talk a little bit more about this performance of INEC. When you're looking at their performance and how they've conducted the polls thus far, you've expressed quite a bit of displeasure. If you were to give them a rating, what would that rating be? And as we sort of go into, so away from that rating, which I have a feeling, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I have a feeling what that would be, if it's a pass or fail or whatever mark you want to give them. I then want to ask you to then expand on how we begin to reform and transform when it comes to INEC. Professor.
First, I'll give you a shocker. You may not just know what my rating of INEC would be.
That's why I'm asking.
You're not a clairvoyant. You're not a clairvoyant. I think that by and large, there is fundamental need for reforms in our electoral processes. That's point number one. Then point number two is that this INEC has shown to the Nigerian people that it, as it were, is not independent. So it dances to the drum beats of those who hold the latch. That's point number two. And then point number three is the fact that the time has come for the Nigerian people to understand that our democratic engagement must be beyond partisanship. We must begin to think about the next generation more than the next election. And I think that I have a message, a very strong message, as it were, to politicians across boards. The time has come for us to understand that the reality before us is monstrous and monumental. The time has come for us to understand that a highly progressive world is laughing at us. I was following both local and international reportage on our elections, February 23rd and March 9th, that's yesterday's election, and it has been less than complimentary. Well, partisans will want to say that some segment of international press gave us a pass mark about the 23rd of February election. I wonder where in their soul they can situate that. because what happened yesterday was just simply a referendum on what happened on the 23rd of February. That's point number 4. Point number 5 is the fact that the media must be very open and frontal as to how we assess this situation, because whatever we do with our country today will definitely affect the morrow. If we think that we can take our eyes away from this ball that is not properly positioned, then we have a problem in the morrow, because our children will ask us, when people were killing and maiming their fellow countrymen in the name of electoral processes and elections, what did you do? When we overlook the fact, some have used the word skirmishes, very few points and pockets of violence. When we refer to human lives, it is a tragedy of sorts. On the 23rd of February, over 16 lives were lost in the process of the election, during and post-election. And as you and I talk, it will be too hasty, and that's going frontally to your question. It will be too hasty to say that INEC has done 40 or 50% regarding the yesterday election, because we haven't even seen results coming out. Until we see the results, and until we see the reaction to the results, and until we understand from the plethora of reports from observers across the country, it will be too hasty and rather premature to assess INEC detail the performance of yesterday. But I want to say that what we have on our hands and what we clearly know is that at different levels, the security agencies did not perform well. I saw pictures, video footage, and pictures of military men escorting ballot box snatchers. They are all over the internet. We saw intimidation. We saw military men invading and ransacking homes and palaces, and that is absolutely uncomplimentary. I think that the time has come for us to interrogate what we have on our hands. Do we have elections and electioneering processes, or do we have military supervised war situations in the name of elections? And what do we really want as a country? Do we want democracy? If we want democracy, what are the minimums of a democracy and a democratic rule? I think these are fundamental questions that we must grapple with as a nation. The media must raise these issues, the civil society must raise these issues, and the political class, those who truly care about this country, must begin to agitate and raise fundamental questions along these lines. We cannot overlook the reality and the urgency of now. The young boy who's going to be 18 in a few months or a few weeks, who should be old enough to register to vote, would ask himself why he would have to go to the queue to prepare or to stay night and day under the rain or under the shine to register to vote. The fundamental questions we must grapple with. The young girl who is going to be 18 in a few days or a few weeks will ask herself whether there's sufficient reason to go through the ordeal, advisedly, of going to register. And these are fundamental questions that we carry into the morrow. And that is why I think that it is not just about sitting down to assess INEC. It is not just about sitting down to assess the APC. It is about asking fundamental national questions. Fundamental issues agitate us. Fundamental issues are before us. It is not just about who won yesterday or who didn't win. It is about what we are deliberately doing to our democracy and what we're deliberately doing with democratic governance in this country. Because it is a sad trajectory. It is a sad testimony that after 20 years of uninterrupted democratic practice, we're yet to get our electioneering processes right.
Thank you, Professor. Just to go back to something you said earlier, you said INEC is not independent. But when you expand on what's happened during this polling, it actually sounds like what you're saying is that INEC is incompetent. Is it that they're not independent, or is it a competency? What actually, we have to start to diagnose what is actually the problem with INEC. Let me know what you think it is. Is it that they lack independence or they're actually incompetent?
It's a mismatch. It's a potpourri of several minuses. It's an amalgam of several mistakes, and I don't know whether to say they're just incompetent or independent or not independent, but I think that it's a mismatch of absurdities. I say that advisedly. This INEC has had 4 years to prepare for what has come as a sham in the name of electioneering processes. And I say that without fear of querulous critics. I am ready to take on anybody on a debate as to how free and fair the February 23rd elections were, and how free and fair, and if you like, credible, the 9th of March elections. We had, point number one, we had an election that was postponed 6 hours to commencement of election about 3 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, we had issues about slow deployment of materials in some places. We had issues about Nigerians saying that their votes did not count and that there was monstrous rigging of the elections on the February 23rd. Today, it's a matter in the courts of law, and we hope that the Nigerian judiciary will be able to do justice to that issue. Now, we have another case. Yesterday, all over the country, we had not only issue about late deployment, late arrival in some places, and then we had issues about the ad hoc staffs not being paid, and some protesting in places like Abuja and Lagos. And as you and I talk, some of them are yet unpaid. But when it has to do with about INEC receiving funds, everybody just goes to defend them. As you and I talk, what will it take you immediately after these young boys and young girls sign off at the point of close of elections to credit their accounts with their pay? What does it cost you? INEC is grossly incompetent. This INEC has outperformed Maurice Iwu's INEC in the breach. I don't care what anybody says about it, but that's the truth as I see it. This INEC has been able to achieve one thing: destroy the confidence of the Nigerian people in the electoral process. And that was what we saw yesterday. Now, what do you think may have caused it? This INEC has struggled to gravitate between the people and those who hold the latch, the puppet and the puppeteer scenario. Someone is saying you have to deliver so and so party at this level. And this INEC is bent on doing the master's bidding. That is part of why it has had repeated logistic problems. That is why one of the best INEC recs is under fire. I am talking about Mike Igini, the rec in Akwa Ibom. The very few exceptional recs are those who are having problems with the leadership of INEC. And you know, ask yourself why. Because they have said that they swore to an oath to ensure that the electoral process is free, fair, and transparent. And I want to say here that I am not talking today as a political activist or a politician. I'm not speaking to Nigerians today as someone who has sympathies for any candidate. I am talking about the need to grow our democracy and make our electoral process free, fair, and transparent. It is time that we understood that at the core of democratic engagement, at the core of democratic growth, is how free, fair, and transparent our electoral processes and protocols are. And unfortunately, you cannot, even if your party is winning, even if your party is losing, you cannot say before God that you're satisfied with the electoral processes as it presently is. You cannot say before God that you can give a thumbs up to the 23rd of February election. You cannot say before God that you can applaud the 9th of March election. So the time to begin to push for fundamental and formidable electoral overhaul. the overhaul of our laws as to election and organization of elections, the overhaul of everything that has to do with the Electoral Act, the overhaul of our electoral normative to allow for digital processes and electronic voting, if you like, the overhaul of the entire processes to ensure that no longer will the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria appoint an INEC chairman, but perhaps, like Justice Uwais opined, the Supreme Court does that. You know, I think that the time has come for us to fundamentally address these issues, and rather than play the ostrich, rather than dance in the dark, when you should actually salute and applaud what is right and call a spade a spade. I think that if we do not do that now, what we shall be etching on our collective canvas, what we shall be etching on our political sphere and amphitheater is a tradition where anybody and any party in power can subvert the will of the people in terms of the electoral processes, and you now expect, like people were saying over the past 2 weeks, that the candidate who lost an election that is obviously and manifestly unfair, that the candidate who loses an election that is not free, fair, and credible should applaud or commend the victor. I think it is great injustice to democracy.
Professor
You know, there is a
Nwokobia.
legal maxim that as lawyers, please, can I just chip in this? There's a legal maxim that says, ubi jus, ibi remedium. Where there is just, there's right, there's got to be remedy. You cannot constitutionally give a right and then in the public space ask people to throw away that right. We have the right as people, as a nation, and as political operators to say no when we have to say no. And that right should be seen as part of the evolution and deepening and development of the democratic process. So I am 100% in support of those who decide to go to the courts of law to either reclaim their mandate or determine the freeness and the fairness of an election.
Right, you've talked about INEC and their deficiencies. You've also touched on the role of the judiciary. Let's look at another major talking point, which has been blanket violence across the land, particularly in the South-South. What would you say has been at the root of spiraling violence? Let's look at the fundamentals, as you were saying. What is the root cause? Because surely that's not an INEC issue.
The witch cried last night. The child dies this morning. And you're left with conjectures and the realities to grapple with. We have heard some leaders of a certain political party say that they must make inroads into the South-South. We have heard political operators from one side of the divide say that they must have 1 or 2 oil-producing states in their party. They must have the leaders, the governor. They must have notable political positions and offices within the South-South. And so what do? They decide to use the military. They decide to use compulsion. They decide to use force and impunity. And what do you get? Those who are on the ground perhaps says, no, we're not going to allow it. That's exactly what we have on our hands. It's a situation that you cannot overlook. You cannot sow beans and expect to reap. It has come, and that's exactly why I said that this analysis this morning is service to country, not necessarily a call to partisanship. But I do not care if partisans think me unfair. I think the truth is the God I worship. And like my mentor Mahatma Gandhi would say, that it doesn't matter if you're the minority of one. If you say the truth, you will be vindicated. The problems in the Niger Delta and the South-South is actually the result of political operators trying to manipulate the electoral process to ensure that parties that are not on the ground in the Niger Delta and the South-South gain grounds. That's exactly what is happening. And those who do not like this truth do not care about our country. And I do sincerely think that what we must do is to make politicians understand that beyond individual aspirations, beyond individualism and self-centeredness, beyond egocentricity, we must elevate the pillars of us, we, the nation, over and above individualism. Because for as long as individuals attempt and intend to run roughshod over this country, they will have resistance. The world has gone beyond the Hobbesian tendencies where life is brutal, nasty, selfish, and short. The world, a highly progressive world, like I noted here on the 23rd of February, is asking fundamental questions. We do not have the days of Pol Pot. We do not have the days of Mussolini. We do not have the days of Adolf Hitler. We don't have an Idi Amin Dada. We can't have them anymore because the world has been narrowed down to a small village. Those who think that maybe from the recesses of Aso Rock, they can run roughshod over the country and the people must be told that that reality is an impossibility. Those who live in the past, who are atavistic to thought and thinking, who are atavistic in tendencies, who live thinking that you can control and have maximum power, should think about what happened a few years ago, even in the Arabs. You remember the Arab Springs. And I want to say here without equivocation that those who think that you can go to the Niger Delta and throw uniformed men everywhere and take away the mandate of the people must be living in the past. Humans have gone to an extent where the soul, the resilience of the soul is stronger than the sight of the guns. Humans have come to a position where there is a commitment to justice and right, for which so many people are ready to lay down their lives. There is a commitment to due process and decorum, for which people are not scared of the sight of the prison yard, not the sight of the cemetery. We have seen it in human history.
And yet, Professor, all of this is very rousing, but yet you started this discussion by observing the low voter turnout. Who exactly is going to come out and resist these attempts that you have described? The people, the voting public who stayed in their homes?
Now, let me tell you, like when I started, I told you that what happened yesterday was a referendum on the February 23rd electoral malfeasance. It was a referendum against the rigging of the February 23rd election. People showed through the abstinence from the polls yesterday that they are unwilling to allow people steal their democratic will.
Is passive resistance
now,
effective? Is that kind of passive resistance effective?
Just watch. On the second leg, what happened in the South-South was a situation that is a bit different. There is some level of militarization of that space to take power, to take some states for a particular party. And because that goes to the root of the politics of that particular space for about 20 years, almost all the South-South states have been PDP for about 20 years. And it becomes difficult. They consider it an affront on their political engagement thus far. So they will naturally revolt, resist it, and that's what you have there. But I want to say that by and large, I think it was Holmes, one of the greatest American philosophers, who said that the society prepares the crime, the criminal commits it. That is actually what I've been trying to drive home. That until the political operators understand that you cannot run roughshod over the people, until they understand that a highly progressive world will ask questions, whether in their bedrooms or on the streets. Don't forget that the Arab Spring started from the internet. I don't know whether you remember the name Wael Ghonim, who triggered off the spring in Egypt. He was a Google representative in East Africa, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. And he simply tweeted after Bouazizi and the Tunisian situation. He simply tweeted that if he were to die today, and he goes to Almighty Allah, and Allah asks him, who have been your leaders in Egypt? He will say, Mubarak, Mubarak, Mubarak. And then asks whether they were created for Mubarak. The simple trajectory that we cannot run away from is the fact that, and that's why I have told my friends who lampooned the fact that we had so many young aspirants in the February 23rd presidential election. I said to them, it is not about how much votes they won, but about the deep questions that the number of candidates at that pool asked. There are deep questions that Nigerians are asking. We may not have engaged properly. We may not have reached out properly, but exactly times and time calls for strong questions, and those are the questions that in 2011, you remember, when at the age of 40, I ran for presidency. I started that question deeply. I asked that question passionately. And a few years down the line, 8 years after, we had more than 19 young presidential candidates, people less than 50. That question will continue to resonate until we all sit down to pull our strengths and forces together to run through this space and tell Nigerians that governance should not be about individuals and about godfathers, but about our collective patrimony in how we make this country great again. And I want to say that the apathy that you saw yesterday was simply, again and again I would say that, a referendum on the failure of INEC, a referendum on the failures of the present political class, a referendum on the failure of the ruling party, a referendum on how the agencies of state engages with the people. And I say this advisedly. I did say here on the February 23rd that there are agencies of state that had gone to sleep. You wonder why Nigerians did not come out in their numbers. Less than about 30 million Nigerians voted of the well over 70 million Nigerians who collected their PVCs on the February 23rd. Obviously, much more, fewer numbers came out to vote yesterday. And then you ask yourself, where are agencies like the NOA? Where are agencies that must engage the people? Where is the FRCN? Where are the several media and mass orientation agencies of this government? What have they done about bridging the gaps of fear and apathy? What have they done about raising the bar of patriotism in this country? And then you wonder why we're where we are. We have on our hands a government that does not appear to understand that only when there is mass participation, enthusiasm, patriotism, and love for country can you truly achieve what you want to achieve as a nation. You cannot build, you cannot succeed when your country is divided and disunited. You cannot build, you cannot succeed when there's disharmony and distrust. I have said, and look at this will make you laugh a bit. The Yorubas and the Igbos have lived wonderfully well over the decades, over the centuries in Lagos. This will bother you, it will make you laugh a bit, it will evoke some deep sentiments in you, but this is the truth. I have cousins who can speak Delta Igbo. I'm Igbo from Delta State. I have cousins who all they speak in their homes is Yoruba. I have brothers and relatives who are married to Yorubas. We all live together in Lagos. We enjoy brotherhood. My best friends are Yorubas, Hausas, and from different tendencies. And then you ask yourself, what and for what reason do we divide ourselves so deeply? Because we want elective positions. Why do we do that? For what reason? Who stands to benefit from a divided, disorganized, and disunited Lagos? Only the political profiteers. And then you ask yourself why we make that an issue. An esteemed senator yesterday spoke to the media after casting her votes. And she said that they don't trust the Igbos anymore. And I said, what a villainous statement to make. What does your personal ambition have to do with millions of Igbos who live together with their Yoruba brothers and sisters in Lagos? I think that the time has come for us to overhaul our collective basis of engagement in this country. I speak to you almost with great tears in my eyes. I speak to you because I understand that the time has come for us as a nation to pull down these fault lines and tell ourselves that the highly progressive world has moved beyond this. The mayor of London is a Muslim of Indian birth. Across the world, you have Igbos, Yorubas, Hausas, and the likes who are mayors or elected representatives of their counties in Europe. Nobody's saying it's no man's land or somebody's land. The world is talking about inclusiveness, inclusivity, togetherness, and brotherhood. And in the 21st century, those who call themselves our leaders proudly mouth villainy.
Professor.
Proudly mouth things that belong to the 20th, to the 19th century.
Professor.
Proudly mouth divisive demagoguery. Proudly mouth things that, and we think it's something we can overlook. I think that the time has come for us to collectively ask strong questions that will lead to an overhaul and perhaps, if you like, the restructuring of this country. I am today talking to you and indeed our countrymen from a deep sense of passion. We cannot overlook these realities because every 4 years we want people to win elections. We must begin to address them. If we don't address them frontally and passionately, tomorrow we'll all have questions on our hands because our children will not understand. In schools, they play with their Yoruba friends and their Hausa brothers, their Ibibio, Ichekiri and Urobo friends and brothers. Our young girls and young boys are dating across ethnic and religious bounds. And we, elders who should show the way of brotherhood, friendship, togetherness, and love, are dividing our country because we seek to control the collective till, because we seek political control. It's a shame. And I do sincerely think that passionately, Nigerians who do have a soul must begin to address these fundamentals.
Professor, I have to say your last comments and answers sounds like the beginning of a declaration for running for office in 2023. Can we expect you to actually throw your hat in the ring for you to start to make changes on these issues from a macro level, especially an issue around moving us from indigents to citizens? Is this the beginning of a process for you towards 2023?
I think that it will be a bit too early for me to throw my hat into the ring in 2023.
Is it ever too early?
But I do. No, let me tell you, when you watch my line of thought, you will understand. I would have to engage with my constituencies, the young progressives. I will have to talk with our people. We'll have to look for the best way to, it's not easy. As I talk to you today, some of us gave our best and our all to help some candidates get positions. We know how expensive it is to run elections in this country. Mm-hmm. It is not easy. Some of us are almost stranded at different levels. We've exhausted ourselves even at support levels. Mm. And so when you talk about 2023, it's a journey that we must move together with the people as a united front. Do I want to deepen democracy in this country? The answer is yes. Do I want to make the people the summum bonum in our political engagement? The answer is yes. Do I want a country that is responsible and responsive to the masses of our people? The answer is yes. Have I lived for it? Since I was 18, when I started a group called the Voice of the People in Sapele, Delta State, I've lived for a particular purpose, a new Nigeria that will serve for the benefits of the masses of our people? Will I continue to live for it? The answer is yes. Do I intend to give my all and my best for it? The answer is yes. If in the coming weeks and the months, Nigerians say, and my constituency thinks, that I am the most passionate and the most committed for it, I will definitely throw my heart into the rings for 2023. But at the point that we find ourselves, what is important for this country now is simply we need men who must call a spade, who must stand for the truth and what is right, proper, and right. And we need men who must ask strong questions. We need men who must insist that we overhaul our electoral protocols and that we ensure that we have a 21st century compliant electoral act. We need men and women who will join hands together to say to our leaders that in 2023 we want Nigerians in diaspora to be able to vote. If they are sending monies across to their siblings and family members in this country every day, and they do that through the internet, then they should be able to vote through the internet. We must wake up to ask questions and wonder why a simple state governorship election cannot be announced, results cannot be announced 3 hours after polling. When America, a nation of about 360 million persons, can declare presidential election results within 6 hours of close of polling. I think that when India, because some people will, I don't want to use smaller African countries, India, with almost 1 billion people, can declare presidential election results within 6 hours. It took us about 4 days to declare the presidential result. Election that was conducted on Saturday, it was on Wednesday morning, about 3 a.m. on Wednesday, that the results were announced. It's a shame to all of us. So I do sincerely think that the challenge to members of my generation, the challenge to young men and young women, the challenge to our political operators who think that this country can do better than it is doing today, is to aggregate and congregate at a parlor where the parlor's issues of inefficiency, incompetency, and lack of patriotism are frontally addressed and trashed. And I do sincerely volunteer to be at the lead of this movement. That is why consistently I have called for a tendency that puts country first. It's a movement I convene with followership across the 36 states of the country and Abuja. We are saying that the time to put ethnic divides and religious divides away is now. And for those who are too passionate about their Islamic or Christian tendencies, that they think that religion is a 21st century dogma, I give Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, as an example. I give Saudi Arabia as an example. Are you aware that today, as you and I speak, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia gives money for free to those who intend to build churches in Saudi Arabia? Are you aware that the 21st century has no place for religious divides? Are you aware that fundamentalism is being frowned at? And that is why I'll give you a shocker, that the most common name in the United Kingdom within the past 5 years is not Emmanuel or Christopher, but Muhammad. They don't have any problem with it. What the truth about religion, and I keep telling people that my fundamental faith is love, because love is the only religion that God approves. Every other religion is an approach to God. Professor, and I say this without equivocation, Professor, that until we deepen on these frontiers and put the love for God and man ahead of every tendencies, our country will continue to grope in the dark.
Professor, I take your point, and obviously it's correct. We all have to act in love and inclusivity. But they do have a problem with that name, Mohammed, being the most common name in the UK. That's part of what drove Brexit. But let's not digress. What do we do in terms of concrete...
No. Let me correct this. No, I think it's important that you brought it up. No, let me correct this. You see, when issues about religions are raised, it triggers of a chord. I can guess your fate. But let me say this.
No, I
That
bet you can't guess
the
my
name
fate.
Muhammad, I can. The name Muhammad runs around even Belgium, Germany. It's everywhere.
Yes, because of immigration, but let's
Faith
not
is
digress.
supposed to be a person. No, let me land. I'm not talking. No, I'm not. If you understand where I'm going, just let me land. I'm not talking religion. I don't talk religion. I don't have a religion. My religion is love. So you should be very comfortable with me. What I'm talking about is the fact that the God who created humankind expects us to have love beyond ethnic, religious, and racial bounds. And that is the 21st century reality. That is the kingdom of God that the scriptures, the Bible, the Quran, the Gita, the Veda, all the books of faith talk about. Love for humankind. The golden rule says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your strength, with all your might. And the second is like unto this, love your neighbor as yourself.
I'd like to come.
And I believe that the only way for
Professor.
this country to lead the march to a new world is for us to deepen the walls of patriotism and love over religion and ethnicity.
Let's talk in
I
practical
know
terms,
that if we begin to think
Professor.
about our oneness as a people and do right, we will have a new country on our hands.
Let's talk in practical terms, Professor, at this point. We do have these glaring problems with bad actors, as you've described, certain politicians with their constituents in mind, their narrow constituents, what self-interest in mind, sponsoring all kinds of violence against the populace. What can be done to eliminate this from our political process in practical, not theoretical terms?
Let me say this, that the first thing we must do, I think I love this question deeply, is to demonetize and de-incentivize, if you like, politics. I do not see why a professor will earn far less than a counselor. I do not see why political office holders should be paid far more than those who work to make our industries function. I do not see why, and let me tell you, that's exactly why people kill for political office. The biggest business in this country is politics. Mm-hmm. The biggest industry in this country is politics. A man who does not have a dime in his bank accounts gets a godfather to sponsor him, and he gets to political office, and in a few months, he's a billionaire. That's the tragedy of our nation. And so when we begin to, through the Revenue Mobilization Fiscal Commission, we begin to fix the salaries of public office holders such that they are not so much, but they are competitive with those of civil servants and those of professors and lecturers in the schools, you find out that those who cannot go into political office for service, who go to business, who go to the farms, who perhaps go to a dumota, who perhaps go into farming. And then philosopher kings will emerge as leaders. Like Plato would say, that when philosopher kings govern, the margins are higher and governance becomes responsible and responsive to the people. You ask yourself, why would a man put in billions and millions to maim and to kill because he wants to govern you? I remember that the former president, Jonathan, made popular a cliche that his ambition is not worth the life or the blood of any man. It sounded so nice, but how well did those who were around him believe in it? Did we have a 2015 election that was without any modicum of bloodshed? The answer is no. Now, the present head of state and president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria said that he has no latitude to give any other person but himself congratulatory messages on the 23rd of February. And so those who were around him knew that he was saying that I must win by all means necessary. And why the desperation? The biggest business is politics. So in practical terms, what we must do is to review downwards the salaries and emoluments of public office holders. That's what we must do. And then ensure that we give bite to the Electoral Act, and we ensure that the agencies of states like the EFCC, the police, and the armed forces do not play partisan roles in politics. When we do all that, we will ensure that our agencies of states are truly independent and loyal to state, to the government, to the nation, not to individuals. We'll find out that increasingly, only those who truly want to serve this country will aspire to leadership positions. And those who truly want to serve will not kill to get there. That's exactly what we must begin to do. Rework the salaries and normative of public office holders. Give a true sense of independence to the agencies of state so that their loyalty will be to the nation, not to a few individuals. So that we'll have a rule of law, not the rule of a few men. So that we'll have institutions that consider the next generation, not the next election. When we do have that, you find out that bloodshed, human barbecues that litter the streets in the name of elections will diminish. You find out that we have a new country on our hands because only those who truly want to serve will aspire.
Professor, as we sort of wrap up with you this morning, in taking a look at what happened last month during the presidential elections and the fact that no matter how weak it might be, Buhari does have a mandate going into the next 4 years. What are your expectations and what will be the biggest parting gift of this administration, especially when it comes to electoral reform? What does Buhari need to do in his new administration when it comes to reforming INEC?
I am unable to lay a benchmark for the Buhari presidency until after the case at the tribunal. I'm unable to. I will do colossal injustice to the parties at the tribunal if I do so. I'll do colossal injustice to the Nigerian people who believe that their mandates was stolen on the February 23rd if I do so. But what I must do is to lay a template for the Nigerian state. Whoever becomes the president of this country come May 29th, 2019, must begin with looking at how we overhaul our electoral processes. Must begin to look at how we infuse technology in the conduct of elections. Must begin to look at how we bridge the gap between our disparate peoples. Must begin to look at how we raise the bar in terms of making our people understand that a highly progressive world expects so much of this great country. I do not understand why across the world Nigerians are doing extremely wonderful. In the United States, the most educated immigrant community is the Nigerian community. We're doing great feats across the world, and in this country, we're a huge shame. We're doing nothing right. And so we must begin to inspire patriotism, and we must begin to strengthen the institutions of state. Not in this kind of case where we have an EFCC that is absolutely under the control of the ruling government, and they tell them what they want, and they push them like the puppeteer and the puppet scenario. We must, if we want to grow this country, begin to think about how to give some strong sense of autonomy, independence, and a go at patriotic dedication to service for all our MDGs and institutions. When we do that, our journey to the good republic shall have begun. And then when we see to it that INEC is truly independent, then our journey to the new republic shall have begun. When we see that over indigenship, citizenship should be the normative, then our journey to the good republic shall have begun. When we understand that in the 21st century, the normative of no man's land or another man's land to be made shibboleth and called anathema, and engage on the basis of the fact that we're all Nigerians and one great people that must make this country great again, until we do that, then we'll continue to grope in the dark. So I do sincerely believe that the time has come for governance in this country to look for the most effective and efficient hands that truly care about this country, irrespective of partisan, ethnic, and religious inclinations. Those who truly care about our country must be put forward to do what they believe best, in which is efficiency and effectiveness in leadership. And then we must also ask the new leadership to deal deeply with patriotism as a fundamental and mentorship. We also must carry along our beautiful women, our brothers, our sisters, and our mothers, because for so long the world is moving ahead with affirmative action and gender inclusiveness. Are you aware that not the United States of America or the United Kingdom does not have more gender inclusiveness than Rwanda in Africa? The time has come for us to carry our sisters and our mothers along and engage them effectively, because in our mothers and sisters there's great ability to multitask. The time has come for the next leadership to understand that our young people must be groomed and mentored and given leadership positions. Where they fail, they should be commended. Where they fail, they should be removed. And where they do well, they should be commended and groomed for further and higher responsibilities. That's the only way you build a country. That's the only way you make a country great again. That's the only way you can turn a country away from a jangling discord of poverty, disease, despondency, unemployment, inanity, and want to the amazing place of promise. And I do sincerely believe that at the core of this template is a call to patriotism.
Challenge being mounted by Atiku Abubakar against INEC's declaration of President Buhari as the winner of the presidential poll. Aside from that, how would you rate the reaction of the opposition movement to INEC's conduct of the elections?
I think that the opposition, which includes the Conference of United Political Parties and indeed the People's Democratic Party and Alhaji Atiku Abubakar, to the conduct of the elections, I think it's been very mature. I think that the reaction has been without bloodletting and violence. We just saw a few peaceful protests, and then he has gone to court. I think it's salutary. And then I want to say here that those who lampoon the action, Ito, Alhaji Atiku Abubakar going to court, do not even understand the fact that congruent with democratic engagement is the right to seek redress if you consider the electoral process as flawed. And I think that he has done the most mature thing. And to the extent of the plethora of information, data and facts before us, that was why I told you that I'm incompetent to lay a template for President Muhammadu Buhari post May 29th. Until the case in court is dealt with and until the court pronounces him the president-elect of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, I'm incompetent to make any analysis, because what happened yesterday is simply a referendum that the Nigerian people believe that their votes casted on the February 23rd, 2019 was not fairly treated and handled. Nigerians have said in so many ways that what happened on the February 23rd, 2019 was not proper, trite, and right, and that the election was not free, fair, and credible. And so I think that what we must do as a people is for those who insist that the election was free, fair, and credible to go and prove that in the court of law. And those who insist that the election was not free, fair, and credible to prove that it wasn't free, fair, and credible. And let us move from there to deepen our democratic processes and ensure that subsequent elections will be a fundamental improvement in the positive of what we just had. That is my take on it. I believe that the opposition should continue to engage with the Nigerian people and engage leadership and engage with the electoral umpire, INEC, to ensuring that things are done properly and rightly in this country. It is to the benefit of everyone that something is done to build strong faith in the democratic process. It is to the benefit of even the APC that something happens that will reignite faith in the electoral process. It is to the benefit of every Nigerian that something is done to prove to Nigerians that once again, you can truly have faith in the electoral and the democratic process. And this is speaking deeply. It is not in any way sounding partisan. That at the core of democratic process and engagement is the freeness, the fairness, and the credibility of the electoral process. So I do sincerely believe that what we must begin to do is, rather than discourage the opposition, we should encourage the opposition to pursue its case. And rather than praise the ruling government, we should encourage the ruling government to go to court to prove its case. And then, as Nigerians, stay within the ambit of the law. Do not take laws to our hands. Be peaceful and watch the legal fireworks play out. I have always said that for every great development, it should be more about the intellectual engagement. It should be more about the ballot rather than the bullet. It should be about how we develop and engage our people effectively and proactively without the prejudices of creed, clan, or politics and partisanship. We must begin to engage one another to move this country forward. And I am passionately convinced that if we commit ourselves to the new republic that we seek, I'm passionately convinced that if we do what is proper, right, and right, I'm passionately convinced that if we see beyond our political and partisan affiliations and inclinations and put Nigeria and country first, we shall be etching a strong memento on time for our children and indeed posterity, and we will have a great country on our hands.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, I want to take you back to something that you've said repeatedly, and you also mentioned again just a few minutes ago, which is the fact that yesterday was a referendum on the February 23rd elections. One of the conversations people have been having is, as we talk about low voter turnout, and you're saying it's a referendum, and we're using the word apathy, and also some people have said it's been a protest vote. As we sort of talk about low voter turnout, I think it's also important to be very careful about using different words. If you were to sort of say it's a referendum, are you now saying that it's not apathy, it actually is protest? Because my colleague asked you earlier, you saying that are these quiet protests effective? And you keep on saying it's a referendum, but I'm trying to make sure that as we go out there and we say the word apathy when it comes to low voter turnout, that we're using the right words to describe what happened yesterday. Are you convinced that Nigerians have consciously made an effort to protest yesterday?
If you spoke to your friends, if you sent reporters out, you will understand that rather than apathy,
Professor, just so you do know, we did send. Professor, just so you know, we do have people out. We had people out during both elections in the field, and they were repeating hour by hour live.
I know. That's why I'm putting the words in perspective.
Yes.
That's why I'm using the words. Okay. Rather than apathy, what happened yesterday was a referendum. Nigerians protested by staying away. It's happened all over the world. By staying away from the polls, to tell the government that the time for electoral reforms is now, to tell the government that we are unhappy with what happened on the February 23rd. It was more of a referendum than just, you saw. I saw several clips. I was moving from channels to channels. I went out. I spoke with people, and you could hear them boldly When a man avoids voting, or when a man deliberately, okay, just sits at home, when you ask him, did you vote? He will tell you, oh, he will try to make an excuse. But yesterday, everybody that was confronted by the media, those I met, were boldly saying to the cameramen and their interviewers that they did not want to vote because they don't think that their votes will count. 90% of those who were interviewed were of that opinion, that they did not feel safe enough, that they did not think that there was enough reason for which to step out to vote when they are almost certain that their votes will not count. This is a referendum. And I think that these are fundamentally the issues we must address. I beg of Nigerians not to pander to political cleavages or cocoonery. I beg Nigerians not to see this analysis from partisan cocoonery. It is simply the truth. What happened yesterday was Nigerians protesting. It was a referendum of sorts. And I think that as a nation, we must grapple with that reality rather than wave it off with a hand. I think that as Nigerians, those people you saw on the streets do not have PDP cards. They do not have APC cards. They are not partisans. They're disappointed. They were protesting. So let us stop painting it with partisan brushes. They have a problem with the electoral process, and they have lost faith in the electoral process. That is the issue. And so those who are listening to me should take away the fact that, oh, he was a spokesperson to one of the presidential candidates. No, they shouldn't see it from that perspective. They should see it from the perspective of a committed Nigerian who is interested in how we grow our democracy and deepen our democratic protocols. And I repeat without equivocation that yesterday was a referendum on February 23rd.
Now,
and I think that the time has come for us to address that vote.
Okay,
we
Prof.
must address that vote such that we can build faith in the democratic process. We must address that vote such that we must make Nigerians have faith in the electoral umpire. We must address that vote, that referendum, such that once again, Nigerians will rise up like they did sometime in 1993 on June 12th, believing that their votes will count. Nigerians will step out in the rain and in the sun to cast their votes. That's exactly what we need to do as a nation, rather than pander to ethnic, political, partisan cocoonery.
Okay,
we
but
must
Prof,
do what is right, which is grapple with this reality.
is passive resistance an effective way of passing along that message that you are describing? What you are saying is that it's a sort of, well, the opposite of a public outcry, public silence, based on the results of the February 23rd election. But will that message get across? Is that the best way to convey that message?
Now, interestingly, you have raised a very deep thought. But you know, I have said without equivocation, and if you go to my Instagram handle, maybe one of the only major picture mix that I have on my handle is that of Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and indeed Martin Luther King Jr. These are my mentors. And they did talk about passive resistance. They did talk about sit in and sit tight. They did talk about raising your protest beyond the murkiness of violence. I am not here to moralize about whether those who sat at home yesterday did the best thing. I'm here to inspire my country to do what is right, proper, and right. I am not here to lampoon and castigate my brothers and sisters who said that they had lost faith in the electoral process, because if you lampoon them, they point fingers at February 23rd. I think that what we must do is to build faith in the electoral process by ensuring that subsequent elections are free, fair, and credible. I think that the right thing to do is to rework our electoral act such that it will be obvious that the electoral umpire is truly independent. I think that what we must do is to address the fundamental errors that we have on our hands rather than point accusing fingers on anybody. I have watched people say on the TV and several media that the voter apathy is a shame to the people. And I asked somebody, and that's the question I'm asking you, my beloved sisters there. If every day your child comes to you to ask you for something, you give that child what is right. The day you give the child something that is wrong and it doesn't come to ask you for something again, are you going to blame that child? Will you not take responsibility for doing that which is wrong? Will you not correct the error? Will you not do what is proper, right, and right? Why lay the blames on the people who, after February 23rd, had strong questions to ask about the electoral umpire and the independence of the chairman? Why are you angry with those who said that they wanted a new order, but they were denied a new order because certain results were written? Why not prove to the people that yet again they can trust the electoral process? That's my take on it. I think that the time has come for us to give to our children reasons to do right, not to accuse them for doing wrong. I have said at various fora that my late father told me once that if a woman is a famed prostitute, it will be wrong of you to come to her 18-year-old daughter to say, I'm taking you out there for a virginity test. If a man is a renowned armed robber, it would be wrong of you to come to his 18-year-old son to say, I want you to be a pope. There are exceptions to the rule, mind you. But the simple rule is that the society prepares the crime, the criminal commits it. The simple rule is that a son should take after the father and a daughter the mother. I think that what we must do is, rather than expect our citizens to do better than their leaders, we must ask leadership to take responsibility. It was Mitt Romney that said that leadership is about taking responsibility, not making excuses. I think that the leadership in this climb must learn to take responsibility. Rather than blame the boy that chose to play football because when he stepped out on the February 23rd, he believed that the process did not inspire faith for him to do that again on the March 9th. I think that the responsibility is on leadership and indeed the agencies of state to re-inspire and rebuild confidence in the process. I think that rather than lampoon the people who are distraught with the process, what we must begin to do is to build faith again in the process. That is the way to go. Leadership must begin to take responsibility. I think that that is the greatest failure of the present administration. This administration is consistent with blaming the past administrations. This administration is consistent with blaming everybody but itself for the failures of governance. And that is not a good leadership score. I think that leaders must learn to take responsibility because that is the reason for which leadership exists. And then followers will see credible normative in leadership and follow suit.
Professor, as we talk about, as you sort of bring up the issue of governance and how governance has gone to the dogs, basically, is what you're saying. When you think about this administration, you talked about how they've blamed the administration in the past and haven't been taking responsibility. When you look at the process of our elections are very tasking from a productivity perspective when it comes to Nigeria. How do we start to change the way we manage our elections? And do you think that we have willing leadership when it comes to reform? No matter what happens in May, whoever becomes the victor of the presidential election, do you think that the right leadership is in place to actually reform our electoral process? And the fact that it is the lack of productivity that happens around our electoral process? Because really, we've lost over 3 weekends of commerce and commercial activities because of these elections. The fact that the one from postponement, the February 23rd, and yesterday. How do we start to change the level of unproductivity around our elections?
Let me say this. I think that you just made a thesis on how things can be properly done. In asking the questions, you indeed answered the questions. But let me try to elucidate some more on some of the things I think we must do as a nation. First, we must rework the Electoral Act. And does this administration have the latitude, the courage, and the commitment to so do? This is a question that those who should pretend over the present leadership should answer. I think that what is at the core is the need for patriots to govern this country. But let me say this, that every so often, every time I analyze Nigeria post-2015 election, I have a deep moral burden. Do you know that the 2015 Electoral Act as it stands was signed a few weeks before the election? Do you know that the man I fought against in 2014-2015, President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan, had the moral latitude and compass to sign an electoral act that almost was certainly going to see him out of office? Do you know that he dedicated that to the country? It was more about the country than about his ambition. Do you know that for months before the 2019 elections, every time the Electoral Act as reviewed was submitted to this present president, he declined signing it? Because obviously certain things went in the favor of what they had in mind. Do you know that if that Electoral Act had been signed into law, it wouldn't have taken Nigeria up to 2 days to have the presidential election results? Do you know that if that Electoral Act had been signed into law, it wouldn't have taken us up to this morning to know who the new governor or who the governor of Lagos State and the several states of this country is? Do you know it wouldn't? Because results will be transmitted electronically from the polling centers. All this rigmarole of election results being taken from the polling unit to the ward collation center, from the ward collation center to the local government collation center, from the local government collation center to the state government collation center, from the state collation center to the federal INEC central collation center, will not be there. That is why Ghana is able to premium time announce results. That is why a population of about 1 billion people, India, can announce results in less than 10 hours. That is why the United States of America can have results in premium time. But because certain individuals have elevated personal ambition over national interest, they have cost us so much. I tell you, if we had an electoral act that allows for electronic voting for those who can vote electronically, and then we reduce, like the United States of America does, direct terrestrial voting to those in the hinterlands and the villages, do you know that we do not have to shut down a nation like we have done for 3 weeks? Do you know that we do not have to restrict movements? Do you know that we won't lose so much money? But the question is, what kind of leaders do we have? A popular political thinker once said that patriots, great leaders, are concerned about the next generation, not the next election. If we had leaders who are concerned about the next generation, they will be concerned about the economic cost of shutting down a nation because of elections. They will be concerned about the moral cost of shutting down a nation because of an election. They will be concerned about the intellectual cost of shutting down a nation because of election. But unfortunately, We do not have leaders. We do not have patriots. And that is why we must begin to engage ourselves, the media, the civil society, and the progressive political class. When I use the word progressive political class, I am not talking about those who mouth the word progressives. I'm talking about those who are indeed passionate about our country. We must begin to ask strong questions, and we must begin to nudge the process for electronic voting, nudge the process for a total overhaul of our electoral laws and acts, nudge the process for an electoral umpire, the chairman of INEC, to be appointed by an independent body other than the political class. Once these minimum normatives are taken, you find out that as we grow our process, we will not have to shut down the economy and lose billions of dollars because we want to conduct an election. Because simply, the nation will be concerned about the next generation, not about the next election. I think that as you and I engage today, we need to collectively inspire a new thinking in our country where people will truly put country first, where people will truly love their nation and give their thoughts, their mind, and their soul over and above partisan considerations to the future of our children. Because I look forward to where my young son, who couldn't vote because he's not 18, will be able to vote from wherever he is in 2023. I'm thinking about a country where Nigerians across the divide, all over the world, can participate in what happens at home electorally. I'm thinking about a nation that engages the people and does not, for electoral processes, shut down its economy. I'm thinking about a nation that does not send our children out of school because it wants to conduct an election. A failure of all of us and a failure of the political class. We must therefore begin to ask these questions. Do we want to grow a nation, or do we want to grow self-centered and egocentric political operators? If we want to grow a nation, then we must all sit down at the table of strong thinking, patriotism, and brotherhood and rework the laws such that in subsequent elections, we don't have to shut down this country. We must also engage properly such that a man, an Igbo son in Kano, a Yoruba brother in Adamawa, an Igbo man in Lagos, a Yoruba man in Aba, wherever you are as a Nigerian, you have a true sense of belonging because our laws encourages brotherhood, because our laws encourages justice, equity, fairness, and inclusiveness. I think that that is what we must begin to talk about rather than about the PDP, the APC, and the other parties. We must begin to grow patriots who groom mentees. We must begin to talk about those who are in the political space who believe in raising mentees, mentors, who will train leaders to think about our country rather than about elections.
Wow. Professor Chris Mustafa Nwokobia, thank you so much for being with us today. We have enjoyed your your deep and passionate and patriotic love for this country has been on full display this morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's time now for a short break.
Only mine. Thank you.
When we return, Arise News analyst and producer Charles Ohuako will be joining us to review the top newspaper headlines from across the country. Stay with us.